All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Economic Development and Special Development Projects Committee meeting. We do not have a quorum at this time, so we don't need a roll call. Okay. But when we do have a quorum, I will do the approval of the minutes. I'm going to go a little bit out of order today and start with item number 4, which is discussion of ordinance calendar number 34530 to impose a local participation goal for events funded by the New Orleans Tourism and Cultural Fund. We have Lisa Alexis, who is with the New Orleans Tourism and Cultural Fund, along with Sadie Finkel on my staff, who will make a couple presentations. But before we do that, let me just talk a little bit about what we're attempting to do here. So what we're working on dealing with this particular ordinance is that we want to create a local participation goal for large events that receive money from the city's cultural fund. And we are talking about, large entertainment events, large sporting events. And when it comes to these events, so often when we talk about the economic impact of these events, whether it's a Super Bowl or a Final Four or Essence Fest, whatever it could be, when we talk about economic impact, we talk about how many people came and stayed in hotels and how many people ate at our restaurants. But what we're trying to focus in on here is actual direct impact. How are these events actually hiring our local businesses, our local vendors, our local entertainers, our local professional services, whether they're accountants or lawyers or whoever it could be? How are they directly being beneficiaries of these events? So this particular ordinance, what we're doing is we're tying it to local hire requirements. But I think what's important about this as well is that this really has been a partnership, all of us working together with different stakeholders. This ordinance I filed initially a while back, months ago, and there were some things that were unclear as to what we were focusing in on. And we wanted to make clear that we really were only focusing in on grants coming from the cultural fund to these large events that were over a certain amount of money. And that threshold that we've set is $150,000. Because what we're not trying to do here is micromanage the fund for a lot of the smaller cultural grants that you do, and you give, thousands of dollars out to smaller organizations. That's not what we're trying to look into. It's about really focusing in on these larger events. So then, because we had substantive changes, we withdrew that ordinance, then recently filed a new ordinance and started to work through that one, once again getting more input. And I think we've got it in a much better place. But once again, that's why I'm bringing it to committee, so that should there be even additional stakeholder comments and different tweaks that we need to make before we bring it to the full council, this would be the opportunity to bring up those particular concerns. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Alexis, introduce yourself and your team, and then I'll turn it over to Sadie, who can walk us through the ordinance.
Certainly. Good morning, Councilmember Moreno and all that are here this morning. We would like to just underscore and echo what you've just explained, and then share with everyone what it is we do at NOTCF that supports our cultural industry and the cultural artists as a whole, which gives a direct impact to our city and our state. With me is my Deputy Director and CFO, Tiffany Jackson, and Program Director, Clervay Stinson. And we'd just like to note, and if the PowerPoint isn't, I can
I got it.
Still move right to it. We'd like to note that as of today, here in the beginning of 2024, we have awarded $10 million, and that has been over 1,000 grants. And so I would like to just emphasize to all of the listening audience that the huge bulk of our grants and programming benefits our smaller businesses and local artists, and that is where that huge impact of dollars go. However, we are in agreement that we want to have a local hire and participation on large events because we, the city, our culture, truly understand how to put on a great event, and our talent and expertise lies here in our city. through the people and through the businesses. And so we want big organizations to come in and allow us, the city, as it relates to businesses, to take on that challenge, contract with them, and then I'm sure they'll be very pleased with the outcome. So with that, just starting with our 2023 goals that highlight what we're speaking to. We set a goal of 250,000 of youth initiatives, and at the time this was presented to council and budget, we were at 667,000. However, we're happy to say that we rounded off the year by investing $1 million into youth programming and events. We also, as we speak to local business and partnerships, we support the NOLA by NOLA campaign, which supports our entertainment venues and artists. And we actually invested $200,000. However, that supported 50 businesses. It supported over 300 artists. It supported over 300 concerts that took place in the months of September and October. Then our mini grants. Mini grants was set at a goal of 500,000. Year to date, at that time we were presented, it totaled 782,000 of investment. However, we rounded the year of mini grants to, but it was almost close to almost a million in mini grants to our local artists, to local businesses. So we are exceeding, and those dollars are investing into local. It is all local businesses. We convened a cultural working group. That working group was convened to support us in advocating, creating policy, and creating plans and ideas in which we can advance and strengthen our local cultural businesses as well. And then we partnered with multiple organizations. We hosted programming that also supported health initiatives, technology, training, home ownership, and financial literacy. And that is on deck to do so again this year as well. Moving through we have our board that is dynamic, very supportive, and very aligned with the cultural community. Many are cultural artists, others are in the hospitality industry and have great expertise and years of experience in that role. And then we also have Honorable Leslie Harris and Freddie King III that sit on our board as well, representing Districts B and C. So this year, as a proposed goal, we're planning to and have hosted our Honors Gala, huge success, record crowd. We will award 500 grants. Our first grant season has already opened and closed, and we're in the process of processing those grants that have come in. We also, council member, have taken a new approach to our granting as well. For those organizations who have shown a success rate over the past years, we have now entered into a multi-year agreement with those entities. And however, through each year, they will show the fact that they have successfully obtained those goals, and then we will also invest in them for the following 2 years. And so that really helps them in their planning and their budgeting bottom line as well. Youth initiatives, we plan to invest $300,000. However, we will probably exceed, and I will say that we have already invested in STEM NOLA, Art of Mardi Gras. We were a sponsor of that took place at the Sanchez Community Center. Hundreds of youth, guardians, and also partnering with Boeing and Entergy that are investing in our youth. So we've already begun the year doing what we said we would do. Our NOLA by NOLA will take place in the fall, and that's already geared up to be a very strong programming that we hope will bring many into the city of New Orleans as well. We're going to continue to support our youth programs, and we're going to host 4 Elevation workshop series that will be in partnership with other businesses here as well. So that is just a highlight of what it is we will be doing and how we will utilize the dollars that have been approved by City Council for our budget this year. We're already churning and moving along, but we're underscoring and want everyone to know that these dollars that we are the language that is being proposed in this ordinance, we are in agreement with and we support. We want our local cultural businesses and artists to be hired, to be engaged, and to be contracted. And so we stand strong in that, and we believe it's a great standard that should be set across the board.
Thank you, Ms. Alexis. And I'll say this too, I've also talked to tourism leaders who are also telling me that they believe that this is a positive step. And in regards to Super Bowl, there are some initiatives that they are currently working on with Super Bowl officials that will certainly be very much in line with this, and particularly with ensuring that Black and minority businesses are part of having direct impact with Super Bowl. And I know that that's going to be announced soon. I'm not allowed to make the announcement for them, but I know that that's also going to be announced soon, and we hope to have some representatives before this committee in the near future so that they can further explain those particular initiatives. With that, let me turn it over to Sadie Finkel, who's on my staff and leads my policy, to go over the ordinance for us. I'd also like to recognize that Councilmember Thomas is here with us as well now. Go ahead, Sadie.
Good morning, council members. Good morning, public, and thank you, Lisa. I'm just going to do a quick overview. Council President Moreno already gave a tremendous introduction with respect to the background and the impetus for this legislation. Ultimately, we know, again, that there are many national and international events that convene right here in the city of New Orleans, but often we get feedback from the public and from our local businesses that they do not feel included or employed or integrated into some of these large-scale events. And certainly building up our small businesses is critical to the future of New Orleans. And so what 34530 does is it prioritizes a direct local participation requirement when we are allocating large amounts of funding to some of these events. Going quickly through the ordinance, again, this does not touch on some of the great work that the Cultural Fund is already doing with respect to many of the initiatives that Lisa outlined for you just now. What this focuses on is events where the Cultural Fund is awarding more than $150,000. And examples of local participation include legal, accounting, audiovisual, catering, all of those things that can really contribute to the success of event and also bring aboard our small businesses. Should the Cultural Fund look to award $150,000, they are required to do two things. The ordinance outlines that they must comply with local hire, and if for some reason they feel that an event cannot comply with that threshold, then they can come before the council and provide greater context and details for that event's proposal. I won't go too much into the nitty-gritty here. We've covered the first two, $150,000 threshold. That is in line with Code Section 70-499A, which again sets a limit of 30% of an event's total funding to local hire initiatives, with a specific demarcation of 10% for DBEs, which I think is really critical as well. The ordinance does provide that opportunity to appeal. And then we also ingrained some reporting requirements. The Cultural Fund already comes before the council during the annual budget process. And in that, they will have to include a detailed plan for events in the forthcoming year and how local participation will be guaranteed. And subsequently, as part of their already existing reporting process, we'd like to include those awardees amongst the other awardees that Lisa already ran through for us. Before you, you will have a couple of amendments. The first one clarifies that the local hire section we're referring to in the code is Section A. Again, that's the 30% goal with a 10% DBE goal. It clarifies specifically that these events are at $150,000 above. And then finally, the reporting requirement that they must furnish a list of all events, those below $150,000, and as well as those marquee large-scale international events as part of their annual city budget process. And certainly we would love to attract more of these events, but they are limited in number, so we don't believe that to be a huge threshold to surmount. And that's really it. I'm happy to answer any lingering questions on the ordinance or any of the amendments.
Well, thank you, Sadie, and thank you to Ms. Alexis, you and your team. Like I said, I know that this took us months to get to exactly where we needed to be, and you know, based on what we hear today, you know, happy to make any additional tweaks that additional council members want to put into this, and also, of course, members of the community as well. Councilmember Thomas.
First of all, thank you, Sadie. Thank you, Ms. Alexis. Every little bit helps, but if you follow the Congressional Black Caucus on their wealth report on status on wealth and income and disparity, if you look at the data centers report on income and wealth, if you just track New Orleans in terms of loss of black contractors, whether here at the City Council or even in the administration, if you track what happened with the open access and many of the challenges to that, I appreciate the small increments, but the one thing that we learned at the Congressional Black Caucus, especially in their Conference on Wealth, was that though this may help in some sectors, Council Member, the disparity is so great that all of the awards programs and even grants aren't enough to close the gap in the disparity in wealth between the African American community, African American females, and the white community. So at what point do we begin to look at bigger contracts that tip the scale? Those reports are out there. We just had an opportunity when you talk about the garbage contractor where an African American contractor said he could save us $19.5 million, didn't take that seriously. We've lost professional legal contractors who used to advise us, and we've turned those things into jobs. So I appreciate the small increments, man. This is, God bless y'all for that. But it's not enough, you know, especially in a city that's largely African American. So what are we looking at in terms of major developments, major contracts, especially that the municipality controls, that can begin to do what the Congressional Black Caucus said is impacted? Because if you look at, see, it's simple math, right? The disparity is so great now, even with grants and special appropriations, Councilmember Moreno, it's not enough to close the wealth gap. So we have to be intentional about large opportunities if we're going to impact that. There's some studies that show that per capita wealth of black females in many classes is only $5. We know that locally in this community, per capita wealth amongst African American men, especially with the unemployment, rivals what happened in many cases during the Great Depression. So what are we doing, Sadie and Ms. Alexis, in terms of those major opportunities so that they can complement some of the minor opportunities like this to have that level of social impact that we need?
From a cultural standpoint, I would say that with our Office of New Orleans Tourism and Cultural Fund and the Office of Cultural Economy, we have over the past 5 years and 2.5 years with NOTCF have established for the first time in history investment into minority businesses, artists, and the like. So we have the $10 million that we've invested from NOTCF. Then if we add another 4 or 5 million from Office of Cultural Economy, I'll say that we have done a historic breakthrough and opening those doors of opportunity. And then not only that, but then allowing those artists and those businesses to show their capacity to scale up and to do great work. And so that's opened doors for them to travel and be booked across the world. So that's the steps we're taking, is opening the doors and then pushing them right through, because our culture is great and it deserves, and not only doing that, but doing it at a fair market rate. So our artists are now being paid at a fair market rate that I trust will begin to start the standard of what market rates should be here in the city across the board.
But when you talk about major events, right? Give an example. You know, let's just like the disaster model, right?
Okay.
In terms of recovery post-Katrina, I always called it the pyramid thing, right? So there's a certain amount at this level, but by the time it gets down to the local level, you're dealing with pennies on the dollar. Major event, Super Bowl. Major events, concerts. The $150,000 level is great, but it doesn't impact the whole in terms of closing the gap on the disparity.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you raised a really great point. I want to clarify that the 30% threshold, to be clear, is not on the $150,000 amount. It's on the budget for the event as a whole. So, certainly we want to talk about large-scale impact, especially for our DBEs. And so I think this is a really great opportunity where you have a Super Bowl that's coming with a large-scale budget, or events like Jazz Fest and French Quarter Fest that are leading the way and already doing this work. And I think a second thing is really important. NOTCF is already funding our culture bearers that are leading the way and make New Orleans what it is. But this brings in a whole host of small businesses that are currently not getting a piece of the pie. And like I said, those are AV, that's catering, that's production, that's post-production, that's lighting. And so all of these businesses have an opportunity, I think, for this first time to sort of be guaranteed that inclusion. And to your point, I think those larger scale events being on their roster will help them build more and work to close that gap.
I just think we have to start tipping the scale. I mean, the data is readily available. I mean, you can Google it right here, and I think we just have to be mindful that when we're having programs like this, that we impact it so that the next year the number is lower, the threshold
Totally.
is lower, and that it's sustainable, to be honest with you. So I'm gonna keep track of this. I've got a lot of the data from the last few Super Bowls. The Congressional Black Caucus has given us a lot of that information. The data center provides it. So I'm just hopefully mindful that a lot of the open access programs, a lot of the minority programs, especially since they were outlawed, set aside by the Croson and Richmond decision, they have not made the impact to change the trajectory of the disparity.
And I think that's the importance of the reporting requirement in the ordinance. And I, look forward to sort of seeing what the first year, second year, third year does, because I think data is truly important, and I agree with you there.
Yeah, I've been specifically tracking the last 6 years and watching how contracting is done from the city council, how contracting is done from the administration, and private developments. And it's very telling when you track what's happening on the government side in terms of loss of professionals, loss of black contractors, loss of black professional service people versus, so man, thank you guys, man, what a blessing.
Councilmember Morrell.
Thank you. Apologize for my tardiness. I do appreciate, I know there was some work done because the original bill, there really was no minimum threshold. And so there were some concerns from some local culture bearers that these tiny, tiny grants would require you also to go randomly find someone to partner with. So the threshold was raised to some extent to only target the large out-of-town events. Now, I have one specific question. Can the mayor waive this threshold?
So there is a baked-in opportunity. In order to allocate funding of $150,000 or above, NOTCF must come before the council and sort of present the case, demonstrate local hire, et cetera. If NOTCF believes that they cannot hit that threshold, they're certainly welcome to come and provide context, and the council is empowered to still allocate the funding, provided that they feel comfortable with NOTCF's explanation as to why that threshold is not being met.
I think that's a really important point, because the challenge right now is the biggest complaint about the city DBE program is that the DBE requirement is consistently waived with no local input. And that when you talk to contractors, and that's been going on for years, that what contractors, generally speaking, for years in the city of New Orleans, they would make a token effort to bring in a DBE partner, and mayors have had for years the ability to just say, well, you tried, and waive it. Having that requirement that you guys would have to come before us, and if there was no threshold met, truly make the case that it was the exception, not the rule, that's really going to put the onus upon those individuals who have that DB requirement to actually prove they didn't just call one person, one caterer, and go, they weren't available that day, so we couldn't do it. You have to actually have the receipts to show that you went through the process extensively. And really, I think you're only going to see waivers when you have specialized professional services where we might not yet have that person to do it. Like there might be someone who has a specific AV requirement or post-production requirement where the facilities don't exist here. But for the most part, I think having that waiver requirement, and it goes towards, I know what Council President and I have been working on with economic development in general, that the more requirements you have for public input, the more opportunities you have for transparency, that when people are doing the right thing, we can all lift it up and support it. But it's going to be really hard with all those transparency requirements for people who are trying to skirt the requirement to actually skirt it and be successful. So I appreciate the changes there. I kind of hope we mirror this in the DB program in general, because I think if we had this public requirement that if you're going to waive contracts, maybe you do need to have council approval to waive a DB requirement on all contracts, not just these ones through NOTCF.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you know, just to remind everyone too, that another transparency measure that we move forward that is in the process of being implemented right now is the DB scorecard. So we can see exactly, you know, which department is really doing it right and making sure that they are being compliant with the DB requirements, and which departments you're seeing a lot of waivers for, so that we can figure out exactly what's happening within each department. So that's currently happening right now. Councilmember Thomas?
Yeah, I beg to differ with my colleagues' comments, especially when you talk about special programming. Post-Crowson and post-Richmond decision, we've had different programs, the municipalities, local communities, but they have not impacted the whole. Not because I say it, because it just tracked income and income disparity in the city the last 6 years of post-Katrina. If you look at the poverty index, post-Katrina. In the cities where it's worked, it's not been because someone had an ordinance or someone had emotions, it's been because there's a will, right? If you read Regime Politics, if you read the Dellums study, if you read a lot of those folk, it was because business people knew that if they came to a city, that it would be unacceptable, especially if it was an African-American city with black leadership. It would be unacceptable if they didn't have a minority partner, if they didn't have a minority outreach team. So this is absolutely, man, a blessing. But at some point, there has to be an atmosphere here where folk know if they're coming to do business in New Orleans, and if they're doing business in New Orleans, it's unacceptable to leadership if it doesn't look right. And what that does, it gets you beyond the minority percentage point. It gets you, then you begin to look at 50-50 partnerships. Or in many cases, major companies who have bonding to work partner with smaller companies. So this is a good start. But in terms of the wealth index and the disparity in the gap, we'll begin to close that gap when we can top programs like this with an atmosphere where folk know if they're going to do business here, if it doesn't look right, if there aren't women involved, if there aren't African Americans involved, then we're not going to sign off on the contracts.
And again, you know, I think that it's been demonstrated, like I mentioned with Jazz Fest and French Quarter Festival, that this is doable. And so it's time for our larger events, those that are not based here, that if they want the city to invest in them, they need to invest in our people. And so I think this is a really great start.
And we totally agree. And we're not looking at this in a manner of requirements. We're looking at this as economic development, whereby our businesses are brought in. They have an opportunity to now understand what it takes to be scalable and to have the major contracts. So I'm not looking at anyone remaining on coming through the doors as DBE or coming through the doors as the minority, but actually understanding and having access to understand how to scale up and build up and then become a primary. So all of this is to create the opportunities for our businesses to grow and not just be at a certain level.
Yeah, and speaking of being at a certain level, Councilmember Thomas, you bring up really excellent points, because even if we had a really robust DBE program here in our city, how do we ensure that once they graduate that they're still successful? Because when I visited Atlanta and you know, they believe that they have a very successful DBE program, when they did an analysis of it, they actually saw that once again that the disparity gap wasn't any better. And the reason for that is that they believe that they didn't have decent transition services to ensure that these companies, once they graduate from the program, that they would still be successful. I think the other piece too, where Councilmember, I think all of us as a council need to be a strong voice, in that it shouldn't just be about government partnering with minority businesses. It should be about our private businesses in our city partnering with Black and minority businesses.
Where Atlanta won the battle.
And that's where, absolutely right, and that is where Atlanta won the battle. And that is how you created these really successful Black businesses in the city of Atlanta. And that's, in my opinion, where we really need additional work on. Councilmember Morrell.
Thank you. I mean, it's no surprise that I disagree with my colleague. I think, generally speaking, we have had DB programs in the city of New Orleans for over 40 years, actually closer to 50 years. The reason why, from my perspective, DB programs do not work, and it goes back to the whole idea of if we have Black leadership, everybody will get fed. Historically, that is not true. The reality is that a DB program by itself, for the most part in the city, creates a list of people that are available, who have applied and who are accepted into the program, who are eligible for DB work. The complaint that we have gotten as a city for years is the same people get the work, and that there is no equity, that everybody who applies and is accepted as a qualified DB will actually get the work. That is where I talk about, I am over the ideas of empirical mayors who will come in and wave a wand and everybody in the DB program will be taken care of. The reason why I'm such a strong proponent of transparency and accountability when it comes to DB programs is that if you have transparency and accountability, if you're analyzing the DB program from more than just inside a mayor's office, then you can make sure the same 15, 20 people aren't getting all the work. You can make sure that when a waiver is happening, it's not because they couldn't find anybody. When a waiver happens, it will be an exception, not the rule. The more that we have data publicly available to evaluate these programs, the more you can see who's getting the work, who isn't getting the work, and why they aren't getting the work. The more accountability we have, the more that people who are going to make money off this city, whether it be through a grant through NOTC or whether it be for tremendous road work, if we have transparency in who's getting the work, then it's easy to identify when work is not being spread around, and it's easy to identify when the program is not working properly. So respectfully, the reason why I believe we need more ordinances and we need more transparency is because you're not counting on the right mayor for 4 to 8 years. You're creating institutions inside of government where people, the average person, can see what's happening, and the average person can call foul when something goes wrong. So I think that from a policy standpoint, there's some disagreement. I think we all agree that the end goal is to have robust DBE local participation in all programs, because I think the real reason why, when you look at some of the major other African-American majority cities in this country, why we've fallen behind, is our DBE policy has been haphazard at best. There are certain administrations where it was pushed real hard. There are others where it wasn't. There are administrations where the same 3-4 engineering program companies got all the work, and there are administrations where it got spread. But if we're not tracking that data, if we're not providing the public with that information to hold us as government to account, then we allow ourselves to let that type of behavior perpetuate itself.
And I think that what you're saying is, I 100% agree with that, but I think it can be expanded to overall contracting in general, because it's not like we're just hearing that from DBE contractors. We're hearing that from businesses as a whole, that they feel like it's only, that the perception is that it's only a certain group that gets all of the work. Did you want another bite, Councilmember Thomas?
Yeah, that is totally wrong. I mean, it sounds good when you can say stuff and be forceful, right, and try to make it right. But if you look at the wealth index, if we were targeting certain people, especially those great Black mayors we had, or the ones who maybe weren't so great, if the same people were getting all the work, there would be more Black millionaires in this town. Those people would be listed, but they're not. The problem here is that kind of political rhetoric, right, where you would think that politically Black folk are just looking out for certain Black folk. Well, no, in many cases, if you want to say it, they haven't looked out for anyone, because people have not participated. And this is one of the great injustices, right? when you try to create an atmosphere like certain people and our people have benefited, but nothing about the wealth index supports that argument. You can't even name the people who have benefited from one political regime to the next, from Dutch to Sidney to Mark to Nagin to this, and say these people benefited to the point where they're millionaires. But the same white contractors have, the same white professionals have. So stop creating these disparities where just black politicians are picking out certain people. There's a whole list of folk that started with Dutch who don't even exist anymore. Businesses who operated under Dutch and Sidney and Mark and others who don't even exist anymore. And it's interesting that Councilmember Moreno has a better perspective on this, because in many cases they couldn't transition to the private sector. So it's easy to cast disparity on black leadership, to say that they haven't been enough, but we've had some good black leaders in this town. If they've been able to partner with the business community and partner with people who had an agenda not to disparage our community, then maybe more people would be doing well. Name me the black millionaires. Name me the ones that certain black politicians say, you're going to benefit. Many of them don't exist anymore, and I can rattle off their names.
Couple of things. I'm sure obviously you're coming back to me, Council Vice President. One, I didn't single out black leadership as the one giving out the work.
You always do.
Excuse me, Mr. Thomas.
You always do.
I let you speak.
You're trying to dilute everything, anything good that black folk have done in this town. You're trying to dilute it and create a disparage on
Mr. Thomas, this is the habit that he has. I'm trying to speak. I let him speak. He's going to press his mic again. And he likes to interrupt me before I can speak, because that's what people do when they're afraid you're going to make a point. They interrupt you a lot so you can't make your point. Number one.
Discount all my data.
Once again, he's continuing to interrupt me so I can't make a comment, because that's what he does. That's what bullies do on a mic. Can I make my point? Number one, I did not talk about or single out black leadership. I've said mayors over the last 50 years, the majority of which have not been African American. The reality is that, generally speaking, number one, I don't have to identify the black millionaires that were made. I can point to the checkered history the city has with mayors who have had corruption issues. So I'm not going to have to defend that the city's had issues. There's not a single person in the city, black or white, who does not feel like this city has historically had issues. What I'm talking about is us as government being accountable for what we do. What I'm talking about is transparency and contracting to make sure that we are hiring the people that we say we're trying to hire. I'm not talking about singling out or disparaging people. I do appreciate the effort of Councilman Thomas to try and turn this into that, but I haven't said any of that. What I've said is we as politicians should always be held account to the people who elected us. We say things, but then because we don't collect the data, we don't actually have the proof to see we have achieved what we set out to achieve. All I'm saying right now, and all I've said consistently, is that we need transparency and we need to provide data showing that we're doing what we're saying we're doing. This entire nonsense about me disparaging the history of the city of New Orleans, play the tape. I didn't say any of that. I do appreciate the efforts by members up here to try and make every issue a political issue where we can try and score quick points on each other. And this, for me, is not about that. What I see right now is an effort to have a truly transparent DBU requirement with NOTCF. What I see is us trying to address a complaint we've had for years, for time immemorial. We've had, I want to say, over a dozen Super Bowls, and every time we've had one, local and disadvantaged contractors have been left out. All we're talking about today, that's right. All we're doing today is putting a requirement in that makes it so this is mandated, and that if we're going to not do it, there's a transparent process to prove that there was a reason we didn't do it. Now that's what I'm talking about generally. Now, generally speaking about economic policy, the reality is that I care about putting frameworks in place that will make sure that our DB requirements are met regardless of who the mayor is. I'm one of the few people up here not running for mayor, so I'm trying to make sure that, sorry, I said few. I'm one of the people who are not running for mayor, so I am trying to put in machinery and mechanisms so that the city is successful despite whoever the mayor is. I think that we have an ideological difference in that there's a belief that if you elect the right mayor, everything gets fixed. Best case scenario, it gets fixed for 4 to 8 years. We need to do better than that. We need to make sure that no matter what we're doing, the tail of the tape is going to make sure that we can all be successful. That's all I'm arguing for.
All right, let me go ahead and take public comment.
Yeah, and then I'll ask for a point of personal privilege.
Okay. LaJawn Williams, come on up, Miss Williams. Do I have any other cards?
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So I'm here to speak on behalf of the entertainment industry, but I will say businesses as a whole, because when you set up a business here, there's no process to tell you, hey, you need to become a vendor, you need to be DBE certified, like there's no checks and balances. Had Councilman Richmond not gave an event at Delgado years ago, I wouldn't even know that I needed a vendor license and things to do businesses with colleges like Xavier University booking their travel. But we're not aware of those things, so maybe as a whole we need a board or a platform to say, hey, when you start a business, do A, B, C, D, E, F, and then you're prepared to do business in the state. But when we have events like Essence and things coming here, our artists shouldn't have to go on social media to have a place on the stage. That doesn't make sense. They should meet with our influencers and then don't use any of them. Like, that's disrespectful to the city, and don't say you support our culture, because you don't. You want our money. And the people that's coming in for Essence, we're the age that's at Essence now. What you did, we don't want to see those people. So who are you consulting with? It just doesn't make any sense. So we have to change it. And I'm a booking agent. No one calls me for advice to say, hey, book this one, that one. Juvenile should have never had to go on social media and rant about it being included in the 50-year hip-hop when he's in the 25th year height of his career celebrating 400 degrees. That doesn't make sense. Don't come down here and promise us nothing if you're not going to make good on it.
Thank you, LaJawn. Appreciate it. Lisa, I do think that is one thing that could be worked on as to, how do we ensure that information is getting out there to the public, and especially around the Super Bowl, and especially since different opportunities will soon be announced regarding the Super Bowl and how they're trying to tie in with local businesses. Like, we have to figure out the best path to push that information out. So once again, as LaJawn mentioned, she's not, trying to figure out everything on social media and trying to figure out who to call. Like, let's make it super easy. Like, whatever we can do to make it easy for people to get involved and be able to benefit. Any public comment online? No public comment. Councilmember Thomas, you wanted a point of personal
Councilmember
privilege?
Moreno.
Wait.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, you have one more? Come on. You're good. And just
I think
turn
that
in your
young
card.
lady
when
over
you're
there
done.
wanted to
Yep,
speak as
I'm
well.
right on my
Okay.
card. Apologies. I was actually late today because I was getting a call from someone who was actually asking about grant opportunities. So, my name is Ethan Elliston. I'm the executive director of the Music and Culture Coalition of New Orleans, 2533 Columbus Street. I just want to come and sort of speak in support of this as a step. Also partnered with NOTCF. We've been able to help with some of their grants for over the past year. So we've seen sort of the need that is in the community, both to get direct funds, but then also to make sure that there's more opportunity. We just went through a hiring process ourselves, and what I noticed was there were so many young people that were looking for opportunities, that were trying to figure out how they can plug into some of these things, that weren't able to figure out if they started a small business, if they were trying to figure out arts management. They didn't have those opportunities to figure out what their next step was. All young people from here are trying to figure out how to get involved with this process. So looking at this as a step to start to move forward to create more equity within the tourism industry, I think is important. It's not the last, but it's the first step to create that more equity. So thank you all. Just want to put my support.
Thanks, Ethan. Appreciate it. Ma'am, do you want to speak? Have her come up, and then she can turn in her card when she's done. Come on up. You're fine.
Actually, I'm
Just
here.
say your name, introduce yourself, please.
My name is Dana Solney. I live in District B, which is another situation, but we'll just address what we're here to address. I work in the entertainment industry. I lived here all my life. I moved to Miami, and Panavision moved me back here because film was booming and everything was here. I moved here literally in June, back. from Miami because I felt we could make a living here. You know what I mean? Everything went to Shreveport. All the film went to Shreveport and then came back. Needless to say, I made connections with high-end people through that industry. And a lot of feedback that they gave me when they came back here to utilize the film the incentives to do film is that they used our people, our natives, as what they used an internship, and didn't pay hardly any of them. A few made it, just like you said. A certain few stayed in the industry. A certain few only got those jobs. It's really true. I left. I went back to Miami. So what I'm not only here to complain, but I'm here also to propose that these companies are willing to come here, train our natives. It's exactly what you're looking for, but they have to want it. They can't get up and drag their pants and move slow. They're not used to how we move in New Orleans. So it's to bridge that gap. I'm back to moving slow. I just realized, and I had to wake up and catch up. You know what I mean? Because we move at a slower pace than other cities. So when they're looking for a film permit for their budget and it takes a month, the executive producer's going crazy.
Right.
And especially with music. We could, like Juvenile, we could have him build his own studio enterprise here. Isn't that, they want to make it little Nashville, but it could be, not everybody plays a guitar, okay? So it's got to be a roundabout multicultural. I'm not just going to say African American, because we have multicultural and we need all. We need the billionaires to come here to help the little guys become the millionaires, but then the little guys got to move a little faster up in here and do it right.
Thank you, ma'am.
Just put their people on Front Street. And I've spoke to a lot of people that I've asked them if they would be educated under a platform of the city, which they say talk is cheap. I'm willing to show you who I could bring here.
Yeah. Let me get with you after this because I want to
Yes,
learn
ma'am.
more. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you,
Appreciate
guys.
your comments. Chris Young, come on up, Chris.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, everybody. I represent Juvenile. I'm his day-to-day manager. On last year with the Essence Festival, it was kind of crazy to have to make that video to get their attention. But when you listen to Juvenile, and he came to me himself, he said, listen, I've been in the music business for 25 years. And he was being very sincere when he said this. He said, the first year Essence opened, I was hot as fish grease, and which we all know, the album went platinum. He said, they did not call me. He said, year number 2, they didn't call me. 5 years later, they still didn't call me. And at this time, I'm the hottest thing going. On last year, it was a trick for me because I ended up playing another festival, a smaller festival, just to show what can happen. But at the end of the day, I got to listen to my artist struggle and his fight. There's no business infrastructure there, which we want to work on. I shouldn't have had to go online to give a message. And then speaking with the head of Essence and the Essence Festival and telling them, hey, look, I stay 7 minutes away from the Dome. I will not travel across the river to attend your event because it does not cater to New Orleans. But not for just for this event, from all events, because I'm a booking agent as well. I do booking in different venues in the city. When these events come to the city, they block out all the venues that work on a constantly. We have promoters in the city that spend a lot of money to bring artists without the help of finances from anybody, and they get no attention when these events come to town. It's not fair for them. I can think of a promoter right now, he spends over $100,000 to bring acts to the city. If he loses, he don't look for nobody to help him or have his back. He just makes the money and does it again because that's what we do. Yeah. We have so much love for our city and stuff like this. So yes, the proper infrastructure does need to be put in place. We need to make sure that we in control of that. And speaking with you guys and speaking with Billy, I think we're on the right track. But yes, I'm glad we're here today. But I wanted to deliver that message from Juvenile to say, yes, let's move in the right direction with it, please.
Thank you so much, Chris. Appreciate it. Councilmember Thomas, you wanted a point of personal privilege?
Yeah, first of all, I apologize for jumping in earlier. But we also know there was a former mayor that went to the airwaves to correct misrepresentations of his administration, to correct misrepresentations of history. We'll bring that tape at some point. So just because we say something loudly and boldly and proclaim it, it doesn't mean that it's so. It has nothing to do politically, man. I'm like low man on the totem pole with what I've been through. All of these splendid political careers up here have made mistakes in my life. So I'm just fortunate and blessed to be able to serve, which says that maybe I have a little following. Maybe my people in the community believe in me because I believe in them. The only thing that I was trying to bring up was that program after program after program is fine, but we have not closed the gap on the disparity, whether it's the data center, whether it's the Alice report, whether it's the report on minority investors in business and per capita income. And the reason why a juvenile could be left out is because people think it's okay to do that. If we set an atmosphere where folk didn't think it was okay to leave the black contractor or the black professional out, we wouldn't have to have a program because they would know we wouldn't support it or we wouldn't fund it. And the other thing is, I've been called a bully a couple times. Last time we were in a debate, they brought WBOK up and it had nothing to do with that. And now I know people are like filing ethics complaints about me with that, so you get to find out, you know, a little bit about how that matters. I ain't trying to hurt nobody's feelings. You know, all I'm trying to do is at least have a discussion so that when we're not here, that there's an atmosphere set where the majority part of the community that's hurting the worst, where there's automatic participation, period. Because you can proclaim, I can't shine my halo. My halo's been too dull. I've made too many mistakes in my life. I can't disparage other people and talk about their corruption or their mistakes. And even if I could, I wouldn't do that anyway. All I can do is stand up here and talk about what I believe. But what I do know from black females who've come before us, Susan Hudson, Denisha Turner, Alinda Westbrook, all of those tapes are obvious when you talk about bullying and disparaging and how they're talked to. So forgive me if some folk thought I was out of order. I'm just trying to make sure we put this conversation in order.
Can I make one quick comment?
Okay, and then we've got to vote on
I want to
this.
begin by apologizing. 50 years was too short a time. New Orleans has been unfair to its majority minority African population since the beginning of time. It's just that we really haven't had tape probably since the 60s and 70s. When you look back to all of the tremendous inequity that's been in the city, there really is no time limit per se. I think that we've been more conscious of the inequity because our community has higher expectations. Because once you travel the country, it's sort of like after Katrina, when all of us were dispersed across the country, we realized that things didn't need to be the way they had been in New Orleans. Many of our residents who were displaced went to Houston, Atlanta in particular. They came back and said, how can we be in the majority in those cities and be so successful and be in the majority in this city and be so unsuccessful? So I want to apologize. That 50-year number was not fair. I think that this city has been unfair to black people for a very, very, very long time. That being said, what I will say, and I'm unapologetic about it, is this city can always do better. It has not done well for anyone, despite who the mayors have been. We have never achieved what we sought to achieve. We have had a tremendous run of mayors, each who has made incremental steps during their tenures to try and get us to where we need to be. I have been of the opinion, and I remain in the opinion, that there has always been a history in the city of citizens waiting for mayors to save them. And I think that that has been an unfair burden on mayors and an unfair expectation of citizens that a single person could ever save this city. The reality is that there needs to be changes in how we as a city manage ourselves so that we as citizens, as bureaucrats, whether you're elected or unelected in government, if the mechanisms are in place to make sure that we are doing our jobs correctly, you will see better outcomes. That's just a fact. If we are going to continue to have this idea that if you elect the right person, everything's going to get fixed, that the tail of the tape is no matter how great mayors are, if you don't have the right mechanisms in place, the city backslides, no matter who the mayor is. So as a council person, as a council, everything we've done up to this point, including ordinances like we have today and some other ones we're working on, is to build an environment where everyone can be successful and where people who have been discounted for too long have a voice. The reality is, if you look at a lot of the accountability, hell, we could even go into the national accountability after the reckoning after George Floyd. That's because people got data and information and demanded change. The more information, the more transparency, the more that there is receipts for what's going on in government, the more people hold us to account. So I will be unapologetic in that every aspect of government, as I see it, needs to be more transparent, and we all need to be held to greater account, because every politician gets wrong on rhetoric. We need to have receipts to show we did what we said we were going to do. So, like I said, I apologize. I need to move away from that 50-year model, because this city has not been fair to black people since the city was founded. Thank you.
Kimmy Thomas, come on up.
Good morning. My name is Kimmy Thomas, and I represent IGL Foundation. What I wanted to say is I agree with Councilmember Morrell. I think it's phenomenal that we are taking this step, but I think we need to take a further step and include young adult businesses. The reason is because during the periods of time while these festivals and things are going on, them being omitted from the overall picture, they're going to participate whether you allow them to or not. And so I'm just excited about having the constructs where we have oversight, where we're making sure that we're checking the boxes, but also we need to go ahead and try to at least intentionally include this particular demographic. As a person that does young adult programs, it's so necessary, because if not, the Super Bowl and everything like that, you're going to have more young people saying this is a lick to go ahead and do criminal activities, which is a part of money. And so if you make them direct participants in this and actually train like the Ion District does in like Houston and things like that, you would be more successful. Thank you.
Great point, Kimmy. Thank you. All right, seeing no more public comment, I'll make a motion to adopt as amended.
We haven't filed the amendments yet.
Oh, we haven't. Yeah, I know, but just out of committee, Yeah, because and just so you know, based on this conversation, should there be additional amendments, we'll consider those obviously through the full council. It's been moved and seconded. 5 yeas, no nays. All right, thank you all.
Council President, if I may, I would just like to state for the record that for everyone's comment, we do have a response, because I want you all to know that there's a direct connection to the ladies who spoke to where that information, and we'll be sure that they are connected so that the opportunities are known and available. I just
appreciate it. Thank you, Ms. Alexis. Thank you to all of you. Okay, that moves us to agenda item number 3, which is the Sankofa Community Development Corporation and Committee Resources, Inc. to present on the economic impact opportunities from green infrastructure developments at the Sankofa wetlands. Before I get to them, let me do a quick motion to approve the minutes from the November 27th meeting. I'll move, and it's been seconded by Councilmember Green. All in favor? Aye. 5 yeas, no nays.
Yeah, just this goes left to right, and that's pretty much it. Left and right. Easy peasy.
Hey, Ms. Ferdinand, how are you?
Hi.
Good to see you. Thank you for being patient. Introduce yourself and who you've got with you today.
Thank you, and thank you for this invitation to present today. My name is Rashida Ferdinand. I'm the founder and CEO of Sankofa Community Development Corporation. Our program of the Wetland Park is something we're very excited to have this opportunity to present to you all today. I'll just say a few lines about what Sankofa is. We're a nonprofit CDC that supports community and economic development in the Lower Ninth Ward area. We were founded in 2008. A crazy idea with neighborhood residents after we came back home after Hurricane Katrina to try to revitalize our community. And this is the aftermath of this disaster. People were coming back to rebuild their homes, and we started with a monthly marketplace, and it's expanded since that time to capital projects and systemic programs that try to really address disparities in our community. We started the idea for the wetland park in 2014. We worked with our partner, Dr. Rob Lane, Dr. John Day from Comey Resources, and Dr. Gary Schaefer from Wetland Resources, as well as with a grant from the Sewage and Water Board to develop this project. What we're going to talk to you about today is how this 40-acre infrastructure project can really bring economic impact and development to this community and be a model for other types of transformations that support green infrastructure resilient systems. So with that being said, the transformation of the Sankofa Wetland Park has really involved a really strong community-led process of addressing blight and disregard and an area that was under-resourced, especially since the Hurricane Katrina disaster. We transformed this area into this 40-acre Greenway initiative to really address the impacts of climate change and improve health and quality of life for the residents. We're working to establish this practice of resilience and integrate climate, resiliency, hazard mitigation, and sustainability to help restore the Lower Ninth Ward neighborhood infrastructure systems. This green resilience model is based on this area, this urban green area, and having it have a capacity to prepare, restore, and recover from a crisis, primarily climate mitigation to reduce risks and hurricane protection. At this time, we're investigating the development processes for investments that center around a community's health and wellness. In general, we're looking at the Lower Ninth Ward, but this is a model that, as I said, could be replicated in other parts of New Orleans as well as nationwide. So our current work is involving planning and implementation of capital projects with strategic partnerships among mission-aligned groups to build this systemic approach and development model. This project itself is a very science-centered, data-centered project. In addition to coastal restoration work, it is really focused on infrastructure around bioretention ponds and impacts of native habitats. Dr. Rob Lane is going to talk more about the work that we've been doing since 2014 and the implementation of the park since 2017 to share that research around the science-centered work.
Okay, we can start on this slide. The benefits of wetlands include stormwater retention during storms, which I'm going to talk about quite a bit in the next few slides, as well as improving water quality by removing nutrients, bacteria, and other pollutants, and providing habitat for a variety of animals, such as birds and fish, but as well as otters. We have a family of otters that are living in the wetland park right now, and we spotted one beaver, and there are a few alligators as well. Next slide, please. We have been monitoring the various ecological parameters in the park for over 2 years now, including the recovery and maintenance of vegetation, water quality changes over time and comparatively to natural wetlands in the nearby Central Wetland Unit. And it also includes monthly bird tallies by site and call, which you can see on the graphic to the right here, where this is the bird species that we saw used in the park in 2023, which is over 70 bird species. Next slide, please. By the time the park is finished, it will have planted 3,000 cypress trees. And these will sequester up to 500 tons of CO2 over 30 years. You can see the graphic here goes up to 100 years. The full realization of the carbon sequestration of the park will be realized over that period of time as the trees grow. But 500 tons over the next 30 years is quite a bit. It's equivalent to 160,000 cars driving 100,000 miles, going 15 miles an hour, 15 miles per gallon. So it's a significant amount of carbon. And next slide, please. But the park also has significant flood reduction benefits. It is located at the lowest elevation of the Lower Ninth Ward at 7.5 feet below sea level. And the graphic you can see here on the left Might not be able to see it very well, but it's an elevation gradient going from south to north, from the Mississippi River to the park. And it shows that approximately about 2/3 of the lower Ninth Ward is below sea level, with the park being at the lowest level. So during a major storm, all water would flow towards the park. And with the new retention ponds that we put in there, it now has much needed stormwater retention capacity. We are currently developing a hydrological model of the park with the Corps of Engineers Silver Jackets program. And when we started researching for this model, we realized that the park is actually connected to both the St. Bernard and the lower Ninth Ward drainage systems, which you can see with the schematic that's on the right, which is actually the swim model for St. Bernard and the lower Ninth Ward. The St. Bernard drainage system is actually kept at -7 feet below sea level, whereas the lower Ninth Ward is -15. So there is quite a disparity between those two levels, but they are connected near the park. You can hear water falling down into the lower Ninth Ward from the St. Bernard system there. But nonetheless, during major storms, water enters the park from the St. Bernard drainage system, where it is stored for a period of time and then slowly released back into the system as water is pumped out by the pumping stations. So the Sankofa Park has a broad positive community impact and is a valuable asset to the lower Ninth Ward. And I'll turn it over to Rashida at this point.
So since 2021, we engaged in an economic impact analysis with a firm called Earth Economics to really measure the benefits of this park from the ecosystem work that it performs. One of the things that we realized were that there were stormwater management benefits, property value benefits, education benefits, and habitat benefits. They total over $400,000 in impact, and we measured how much this impact can grow over the next 30 years. We looked at the operation and management cost. We looked at the operation and management cost for the pumping station, for the drainage infrastructure systems that's adjacent to the pumping station where the wetland park is located. And we're looking at the cost of pumping in the lower Ninth Ward in relation to the storage capacity of the park and the trail. We say that's $31,400 of the cost of pumping water in the lower Ninth Ward right now. With this drainage system that we're creating in the park, we were to really activate it and work with our systems, our pumping systems, it would decrease to about $316. There are also property value benefits. If the property value in the lower Ninth Ward would increase to about $58,000. This was measured in 2021, so if we did another measurement in this year, there may be another level of increase. But this area is also beautified by green infrastructure and remediated projects, which also could, we're aware of, increase the risk of gentrification and displacement. We're very aware and attuned of that and are committed to reducing that risk of displacing existing lower Ninth Ward residents and supporting that investment in affordable home ownership and housing programs to ensure that local area is retained by the community. We're doing this through partnerships with local housing developers and working with them to address how more development can take place in the lower Ninth Ward through land ownership. There are also a number of education benefits of the park. We support and facilitate STEM and STEAM education programs and workforce development programs. Over the past years, we've initiated some of these workforce development programs through an EPA Environmental Justice Grant, a grant from the National Academy for Science, Engineering, and Medicine, and a Delta Regional Authority grant, working with Einstein Charter School, working with Delgado Community College, and beginning an evaluation of our program with Louisiana Public Health Institute as our main project evaluator. So we're welcoming more programs like this to the park. Those amazing organizations and groups that lead workforce development programs and lead STEM and STEAM programs to really use this park as a host space for their ecological and green infrastructure educational initiatives. The measurement from Earth Economics of these educational benefits to the park would contribute $113,000 for the educational benefits, as well as $113,000 for the habitat enhancement benefits. And so we know as the wetland park grows and introduces new projects and brings in more visitors, we can really expect these ecosystem improvements to increase with a growing green workforce And with these additional benefits, there's analysis and a net present value that amounts to $3.4 million with an internal rate of 24%. This is over 30 years. So this is an investment that has an opportunity to really grow over time. This has been a resilience model. It's been a significant work of labor and love to combat blight, work with community partners, support land restoration, and really look at this environmental science and education work. A main core of this work is all under that umbrella of environmental justice. We work closely with our partners with Deep South Center for Environmental Justice as leaders for this type of advocacy, activism, and policy making in our community. So our investors and partners in this area include a number of presenters. I'm sorry, I don't see them listed here, but I'll just talk through them. They're not on the slide. So our investors and partners, we've had a number of capital project investors and planning partners for this work. We'll talk about our allies, our planning partners, and our funding partners. We work integrally with, as I said, Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. We hosted a visit from the EPA Administrator Michael Regan with Executive Director Dr. Wright for his Journey for Justice tour. He visited Cancer Alley. He visited this area in Desire, this area where we had landfills where people were being displaced from their homes and having toxicity. He also visited the wetland park and learned about the information and the work that we did to bring educational benefits and ecosystem restoration. Also visited Reverend Charles Duplessis and his family in the Lower Ninth Ward to talk about how their work over the past 20, 30 years have been active around environmental justice. The wetland park was initiated with funding from Sewage and Water Board of New Orleans, followed by Coastal Protection Restoration Authority, National Fisheries and Wildlife Foundation, and the Kresge Foundation. We both planned and developed this capital project and studied the ecological features that impact hydrology, groundwater filtration, and animal habitat enhancement through carbon sequestration. During this current year of 2024, we are expanding our planning work with resources from the Louisiana State Capital Outlay Funds, Army Corps of Engineers Silver Jackets, and National Park Service Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program. We just received a grant as well from the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries to further study and implement these green infrastructure systems and really build this replicable model of disaster recovery and resilient economic development through a comprehensive green infrastructure system that once again supports hazard mitigation and floodwater reduction. So in addition to this being a really beautiful, amazing space, green space that supports health and restoration, it has a purpose, it has an impact on our ecosystems, and has a potential impact for intentional economic development in the neighborhood, and a model that could be used and replicated and developed in other places. In addition to this wetland park development, we are really building a neighborhood resilience model. The wetland park is on Florida Avenue. That's a corridor that has a major opportunity to be developed. We also are developing the program called Lower Ninth Ward Main Street. It's on the St. Claude Avenue corridor. This program was initiated many years ago through a lanyard and plant application and community planning with Louisiana Main Street. Following that, we submitted a full proposal and developed a Main Street strategic plan, which will identify how this corridor could be developed over the next 3 years. Employing a strategic approach comprehensively to commercial corridor development of St. Claude and Florida Avenues include this Main Street project, as well as zoning strategies, partnerships, and resources, building a commercial community, and increasing our corridor branding. We're also developing an anchor project that's a healthy food hub, the Fresh Stop Market. It will be opening within the next 4 to 6 weeks. We've been working on this project for many years in partnership with Hope Credit Union, with Fresh Food Retail Initiative funds, as well as implementation of funding and support from Kresge Foundation and W.K. Kellogg Foundation, with the intention to support the local economy. We'll be purchasing local food from local food producers and local food distributors, partnering with health institutions. Xavier University Health and Wellness Center will be bringing nutrition and preventative health education to this space. So this is an opportunity as well to bring these anchor projects that can stimulate more growth and economic development on our Main Street. We're also developing this Main Street headquarters facility. We'll be implementing this project and this conceptual plan within the next 12 to 18 months to have a green tech education and innovation center and hub with additional tenants. These are all done in partnership with viable allies, people with best practices and experience. We're facilitating this work and coordinating this work so that they can bring their resources to our space and to our community. Another aspect of this work in corridor development is really having resources from public funds to really build our streets and public infrastructure spaces. We have applied for DODT grants for a complete streets model for Florida Avenue to restore its space, fix those streets, create these ADA accessible spaces, build economic development, and support this as a corridor as some spillover effects from the wetland park implementation. One of our areas of work that we're really proud of is our current partnership with the Urban Land Institute. We recently completed what's called a technical assistance panel with a panel of 8 to 9 experts, as well as community stakeholders, business leaders, nonprofit and CBO directors from different parts of the city, and identified some recommendations to bring innovative development and change to the area. We looked at commercial corridor development, we looked at ecosystem restoration and resilience development, and housing. The 2 tactics that we're currently focusing on in partnership with ULI for this TAP outcome is our commercial corridor development, which I just discussed with the Main Street program and all of these other tactics to bring commercial corridor revitalization, as well as this ecosystem restoration and resilience work. And in closing, I'm showing some areas of work that we're doing in the Lower Ninth Ward to develop these projects, build these capital infrastructure spaces, and support programs that bring social and economic development in the area. We have a community garden that's in partnership with the USDA People's Garden, a wetland nursery that will be soon cleaned out. We are transferring these plants that we've been growing for over 3 to 4 years, cypress trees and wetland plants, into the last 20 acres of the wetland park. That will be done between March and April of this year. And in closing, what we're doing with that wetland nursery is going to be growing pollinators. We're going to be expanding what the wetland park is doing for our healthy ecosystems to addressing this transformation of vacant and blighted land. This pervasive blight that's been consistent in the Lower Ninth Ward area, addressing that through restoration of that work. And it's really, really important that we just look back from where we came. That's what Sankofa's mission is. It's to build healthier communities for generations to come, but that Sankofa bird was adopted from the Akans people of Ghana in West Africa. It's a bird that looks over its tail as it walks forward. And I usually open or close sharing when I share this work with this painting. This is a painting my grandmother made in 1968. She raised my uncle and my father and my uncles a few blocks away from the wetland park on St. Marie Street. And this was her backyard. This was their backyard. This is where they enjoyed nature, they understood nature. This was a place that supported green systems, natural environment and habitats that people lived with. And we believe that if we continue to share this type of work with our future generations, we will have those advocates, those leaders to be those ones, those people who grow and build our community, especially with this onset of climate change and what's happening now. So thank you for your time. I want to just impress how important this work is to restore economic development and community development. There are many other great projects that are going on in the neighborhood, many other great best practices throughout the community and throughout the city. And our intention is to continue to do this work and support it through really intentional partnerships, resources, and networking. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ferdinand and Dr. Lane. Great presentation, but more than anything, just really great and terrific work that you're doing at Sankofa. The way that you have grown over the years is tremendous, and it has to do with the partnerships that you've been able to create. The impact that you're doing, obviously economically, is important, and that's why you're in this committee. But the impact that you're making on the community, I've personally seen firsthand. I've seen how events that you've had, whether it's at the actual park or whether it's at one of the community gardens, where I've watched children, whether they're learning about bees or whether they're learning about seeds and planting and getting interested in science when they're very curious, at that very curious age, I mean, that's transformative. You know, it can be that one day at the community garden that really kind of focused in their trajectory on wanting to be interested in maybe biology or botany or whatever that could be. So thank you for the work that you're doing. I wanted to just quickly mention on the resilience piece that you're working on building community solar and potentially microgrids. I'm happy to connect you with our Curo office. We recently redid the community solar rules to make it more beneficial and more welcoming, I guess is the best word, for folks interested in community solar to get into the program. So I'm happy to make those connections with you all to try to expedite any of this work. Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you for the work that Sankofa has done. I was glad to hear that we're conscious of gentrification, especially along that corridor. If you know the history of that corridor and the families who lived there, there were African-American families who owned their own businesses. Many of them still own that property. And the fear is that Sankofa has put so much pressure on people that investors are looking at that community. Sankofa has really probably set the standard when you talk about sustainability, resiliency, what you can do with an urban wetlands model. As kids, that was back on Florida Avenue. You can hear Rashida's father and other ancestors talk about the importance of that community from when the Lower Nine was farmlands. And the great thing about what Sankofa has done, it has started other organizations. You know, we look forward to increasing our participation with Arthur Johnson and the Center for Sustainable Engagement and Development, a community voice, and Reverend Calhoun. You guys have set such a great foundation. The only thing left to do is to increase that participation so those organizations can match the great work that you guys are doing. So blessings and thank you.
Councilmember Green.
Ms. Ferdinand and also Dr. Lane, but I want to thank you for your work. I guess it's been said, but it cannot be said enough. Thank you for your vision, and also thank you for your commitment to community. You live in the area, your family raised you in the area, and also your family is well invested in the area, and you've chosen to stay here in our great city and the great community in which you grew up to continue to invest. And this is a tremendous investment in moving forward in an area that's so important to us, green infrastructure and wetlands, and also preserving, what is nature, the importance of nature. But recently, the organization with which I plant a lot of trees, sustaining our urban landscape. Planting trees is so important for a variety of reasons, as you know. But there was great enthusiasm coming down to engage in the planting of those trees and then going over to the wetlands afterwards, because you can really see the vision for what things are going to look like for the next 50 years or after 50 years and beyond. So just thank you for your investment. It makes a tremendous difference in that community. And as we'll see, it's going to make a tremendous difference, even more so on a regional level, as people begin to visit and see what we can do. I remember when I was even the head of economic development under Mayor Morial, and that was a few years ago, there was talk about redeveloping that area north of Florida Avenue because it was trees and it was a place that people dumped. As you cleaned it out, you saw all of the dumping that was going on. And the vision of something different just couldn't be materialized until you and others affiliated with Sankofa said, this is the way we're going to do it. And I know as you cleaned up and cleared up, you saw all of that debris that was in there over the years, something terrible for the community. Well, you've turned something terrible for the community into something great for the community, and your work is greatly appreciated. And I'm just so pleased to see all the other organizations, including the City Council, including our council member, who have supported the work that you're doing because it's so important. And thank you very much for your work. And Dr. Lane, thank you for your presentation.
Councilmember Harris.
Well, Councilmember Green and I are probably the biggest tree huggers on this council, and so I too want to just say thank you for all the work you do. Absolutely, this can be replicated in other areas. District B has some areas that certainly could benefit from regreening, and we're working with Sol on that and some other organizations to do that. One frivolous question I have is whether or not dogs are allowed to visit the wetland, and can I take my puppies over there to for a walk?
You know, if alligators,
Yeah,
dragging on the
they're,
alligators.
Yes.
They're allowed with the leash.
Yes.
And just clean up, you know.
Yeah, no, we will bring bags and leashes. Thank you.
And you need to take your puppies over there. Nacho's been there, he loves it.
Yeah.
I brought Nacho out. All right, we do have public comment. Devon Barber, come on up.
Good morning, council members. Davon Barbour, 201 St. Charles Avenue, Suite 3912. I know that you are accustomed to me speaking before you regarding downtown matters. However, I'm standing here proudly alongside Ms. Rashida Ferdinand. I had the pleasure of serving as the chair of the Urban Land Institute Technical Advisory Panel for the Sankofa CDC Lower Ninth Ward. If you're familiar with the Urban Land Institute, it's essentially the preeminent land use and public policy organization consisting of architects, economic developers, community developers, and others, all focused on the built environment. And J.P. Morgan Chase generously funded a study that allowed us to organize this technical advisory panel. So back in March of last year, we had a number of panelists who generously gave of their time and expertise to help us develop a strategy to support Rashida's work within Sankofa CDC. One of the items that was so clear about this work was the importance of the Wetlands Park. It is such a jewel and tremendous asset to the community when we think about resiliency, increasing home ownership. We looked at opportunities for eco-tourism, and so this is important work. We're standing shoulder to shoulder alongside Rashida. I'm particularly involved because we wanted to make sure that this was not a study that just sat on the shelf. It really requires the support of philanthropy, the private sector, as well as municipal government as well. And so I'll continue to work alongside city departments as well to help implement this strategy. There is a full report. I encourage you, members of the public as well, to read the full report. It's easy reading, simple 32 pages, but I cannot commend Rashida and the work of Sankofa CDC enough. And so we're here in support of her work.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. Ashley, you've got public comment online? Go ahead.
There are 4 public comments. The first one is from Mary Ricard. Sankofa Wetlands was supposed to be finished by this time. There has been absolutely no progress, all the natural vegetation plowed down and wildlife scattered. This crazy doomed to fail project is costing millions of dollars. Nobody in the neighborhood wants it, and who will maintain it even if it is ever done? The next comment is from Brooke Randolph. We are a small community here, and Sankofa seems to have bypassed most residents of the lower Ninth Ward to push forward its own agenda, one that is not in residence and with professional planners. It neglects to have an open dialogue with the residents. In 2018, AIA came in and spent 6 months coming up with recommendations and published a report, the Lower Ninth Ward New Orleans R/UDAT report. They clearly stated that the community's greatest asset was that it was a sliver of land between a river and a bayou. The report thought that the platform was a major asset and recommended more platforms be created. Sankofa has replaced the bayou with the man-made one. Why? Sankofa has cut off access to the platform in a most aggressive and mean-spirited way. Why? The treatment of the land has been short-sighted with its scorched earth approach, replacing grown trees with tiny saplings. The project is 1 year past their own finish date. There is no real nature on the property, and the quote park, end quote, is a welcome sign for continued dumping. This is a very poor plan. I seriously question how Sankofa received permits that allow this project to move forward. The next comment is from Doreen Piano. I am a resident of the Ninth Ward who regularly walks along the levee on Bayou Bienvenue. I am a birder and an advocate of green infrastructure. For many years ago, when the Sankofa Wetlands Project first began working on Florida Avenue, I was thrilled by converting a strip of land full of waste into a wetlands refuge. Sadly, since then, despite the millions of dollars this project has received, no exaggeration as I have researched it, I am so disgusted by not only the lack of progress made. I encourage people to visit. They started in 2016 with a large chunk of change, but the lack of knowledge about urban water use projects, the inability to communicate with the neighborhood, and sadly, the careless attitude toward wildlife and plants. Many saplings planted have died due to lack of watering during last summer's drought. The ponds had thick scum over them or dried out over the summer because there's no actual water movement, so ducks and wildlife can't use it at all. It's stagnant and could be a health hazard for West Nile. Besides that, a ditch cuts off the platform built by volunteers after Katrina to view what is a thriving wetland. I encourage Sankofa to spend more money on expertise, labor, and resources to get this project finished. I also think a bridge over the ditch would help with accessibility, as many elders in the 9th Ward would like to see the bayou. The money is there, but it's not being utilized properly, and I'm not sure why. That's a shame for everyone who lives in the 9th Ward and potential visitors. And the final comment is from Monique Harden, who is a paid actor from Deep South Center. And she says that the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice commends Ms. Rashida Ferdinand for her vision and leadership as Executive Director of the Sankofa Community Development Corporation, a community-based organization serving the lower 9th Ward. In particular, the Sankofa Wetland Park is exemplary, community-led green infrastructure designed with environmental and climate science to provide flood protection. It is also a beautiful place for recreation and education for all ages about native plants, wetlands, and habitat. We are inspired by this gem in our city. We are also pleased to support the Sankofa CDC with education, research, and capacity building resources. Those are all the public comments, online comments.
Okay, thank you so much. Ms. Ferdinand, Dr. Lane, we appreciate you all being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Keep up the good work. Okay, and then finally, we have agenda item number 5. Adam Swensick will do a quick explanation on this one. Ordinance calendar number 34546 to clarify the timing of receipts of documents transmitted to the council.
Good morning, council members. This ordinance is an effort to plug a little bit of a gap that currently exists in our law with respect to when and how the council receives documents that are transmitted from other agencies. Usually, timing does not matter very much. However, there are a number of cases in the law where timing is important because the council has a specified period within which to act. The most common of these is zoning, where the council has 60 days from transmission of the CPC report to approve a zoning docket or to deny it. We recently saw in the case of the pilot, there's 45 days under state law deadline to act. And so in these cases, it's important to know when the clock starts ticking so that the council staff, and the public can know when the deadline is to act. And the gap I mentioned in the law exists because of our process. The clerk receives an email or a letter, actually gets it, and then at the next meeting, that document is formally received as a communication on our consent agenda. And so those are arguably two different times when the clock might begin. So essentially what ordinance calendar number 34546 does is codify the customary practice that we have followed in zoning cases for years, which is we use the latter date. It is when a communication is formally received on our consent agenda. That's when the time begins, not when the clerk happens to receive the email. The benefit of this approach is several-fold, I think. First of all, it provides some predictability, some clarity. When the communication is received, that is a public document. Everyone knows when it occurs. It's also something that we have already done, and it gives the council more time to act. So it makes sense from that perspective. If you have any questions beyond that, I'm happy to answer them.
Any questions? Ashley, any public comment? All right, that's it. Motion to approve, seconded by Councilmember Morrell. All in favor? Who am I missing? 5 yeas, no nays. Thank you, Adam.
To confirm, this is going to be on the consent agenda? Yes. Motion to adjourn.
Yeah, Eugene. I'll second that. All in favor, aye. 5 yeas, no nays. 5 yeas, Donna. Thank you all.